The airplane was already high in the sky when the day quietly changed for everyone on board. The cabin lights were soft and the sound of the engines filled the air like a steady hum. Passengers sat in their seats with tired faces and wandering thoughts. Some people stared at screens while others rested with closed eyes. It was a normal flight until it was not. A little black girl named Maya sat near the window in the middle section of the plane. Her feet did not reach the floor and she gently swung them back and forth. She held a small toy in her hands and whispered a story to herself. Maya was traveling with her mother Nina, who sat beside her. Nina looked calm on the outside, but inside she felt the weight of travel and worry. She had promised herself this trip would be peaceful. Maya pressed her forehead against the window and smiled at the clouds. She had never flown before and everything felt new. The wings looked like giant birds to her. Nina watched her daughter and felt a small moment of joy. She hoped nothing would ruin it. A few rows behind them sat a man named Ron. He was restless from the moment he sat down. He shifted in his seat again and again. He sighed loudly and rubbed his face. Every small thing seemed to bother him. The sound of people talking annoyed him. The movement of the seat in front of him annoyed him. Even the soft laughter of a child bothered him. Ron glanced toward Maya and Nina more than once. His face tightened each time. His body leaned forward as if pulled by something unpleasant. At first his actions were small and easy to miss. A shake of the head. A sharp breath. A low mutter no one could clearly hear. Nina noticed the looks. She felt them like cold air. She pulled Maya a little closer without saying anything. She had learned to stay alert in public spaces. Maya noticed her mother's hand tighten and looked up with curious eyes. Nina smiled and told her everything was fine. The flight attendant walked through the aisle offering drinks and polite smiles. She paused near Ron and asked if he needed anything. Ron waved his hand and said nothing. The attendant moved on, but her eyes lingered for a second. She sensed tension but hoped it would pass. Minutes went by and the plane continued forward through the sky. Then Ron spoke louder than before. His words were sharp and carried across several rows. Some passengers turned their heads. Others pretended not to hear. The cabin felt smaller all of a sudden. Nina froze for a moment. Maya stopped swinging her feet. The child looked around confused and unsure. She had never seen an adult speak like that before. Nina leaned toward her daughter and whispered comfort. She did not want fear to take root in her child's heart. Ron stood partway from his seat, as if he wanted attention. His movements were sudden and unsteady. The flight attendant quickly returned and asked him to sit down and calm himself. Her voice was firm but respectful. Ron did not listen. What happened next was fast and shocking. It was not loud. It was not drawn out. It was a sudden crossing of a line that should never be crossed. Gasps filled the cabin. Fear moved through the air like a wave. Nina cried out and pulled Maya close to her chest. Her heart raced as she shielded her daughter with her body. Maya did not fully understand what happened, but she knew something was wrong. Tears filled her eyes and she held onto her mother tightly. The flight attendant called for help immediately. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke into her device. Other attendants rushed forward. Passengers began to speak all at once. Some stood. Some froze. Some looked away because they did not know what to do. In the middle of the chaos, a man named Daniel slowly removed his headphones. He had been sitting quietly a few rows away. He had noticed the tension earlier. He had watched the man's behavior closely. He had seen everything clearly. Daniel was calm in a way that felt different from the silence of shock. His face did not twist with panic. His breathing stayed steady. His eyes were alert and focused. Years of training had taught him how to stay grounded when others could not. Daniel rose from his seat with controlled movement. He did not rush. He did not shout. His presence alone shifted the energy in the cabin. People noticed him even before he spoke. He stepped into the aisle and placed himself between danger and the child. His voice was low and firm when he spoke to the flight crew. He told them he would help. He told them to take care of the mother and child. Nina looked up at him with fear and gratitude mixed together. She did not know who he was, but she felt safer. Maya peeked from her mother's arms and saw a calm stranger standing tall. His face was serious but not scary. Something in his eyes told her he was there to protect. The flight attendants followed Daniel's lead. Passengers began to calm. Phones lowered. Whispers softened. Order slowly returned to the cabin. Daniel stayed standing. He kept his eyes forward. He stayed alert. He had learned long ago that moments like this could change lives. He would not allow fear to decide the ending. The plane continued to move through the sky. Outside, the clouds drifted peacefully. Inside the cabin, everything had changed. And this was only the beginning. The cabin slowly became quieter as people returned to their seats and the rush of voices faded away. Flight attendants moved carefully and spoke in calm tones to restore order. Nina held Maya close and gently rubbed her back to steady her breathing. Maya buried her face against her mother and tried to understand what had just happened. Daniel remained standing in the aisle with steady focus. He kept his body between the trouble and the family. His calm presence made others feel less afraid. He spoke quietly to the flight attendant and offered clear help without trying to take control. The flight attendant nodded and thanked him. She asked him to stay nearby while the situation was handled. Daniel agreed without hesitation. He watched closely but did not make sudden movements. Nina slowly sat back in her seat while holding Maya. Her hands were still shaking, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. She whispered soft words to her daughter and told her she was safe now. Maya listened and nodded, though her eyes were still wide. Other passengers glanced over with concern and sympathy. Some offered quiet words of support. A woman across the aisle gently handed Nina a tissue. Nina thanked her with a weak smile. The man who caused the trouble was now being spoken to by flight crew members. Their voices were firm and controlled. They made it clear his behavior was not acceptable. He was instructed to remain seated and stay quiet. Daniel watched without emotion but with full attention. His training had taught him to read people and situations quickly. He could tell the danger had passed for now, but he stayed alert. The plane continued to move smoothly through the sky. Outside the window, the clouds looked peaceful and unchanged. Inside the cabin, emotions were heavy and mixed. Relief and shock existed side by side. After a few minutes, the lead flight attendant approached Nina and Daniel. She asked if Nina and Maya were okay. Nina nodded and thanked her. The attendant offered to move them to another row with more space and comfort. Daniel helped gather their small belongings. He moved carefully and respectfully. Nina followed with Maya still close to her chest. The new seats were farther away and quieter. Maya sat down and looked around slowly. She clutched her toy again and breathed more evenly. Nina sat beside her and kissed the top of her head. Tears finally slipped down her face, but she did not make a sound. Daniel stood nearby and waited until they were settled. He then took a step back to give them space. Nina looked up at him and spoke softly. She thanked him for stepping in when no one else could move. Daniel nodded and said he only did what was right. He told her she was strong and her daughter was brave. His voice was steady and kind. Maya looked at Daniel and studied his face. She asked him if he was a helper. Daniel smiled gently and told her yes. That answer seemed to comfort her. The flight attendants continued their duties and kept a close watch on the cabin. Passengers returned to their screens and conversations. The tense moment slowly faded into memory, though its impact remained. Daniel returned to his seat but kept his awareness sharp. He did not fully relax. He checked the aisle and listened to the sounds around him. Old habits stayed with him even in calm moments. Nina watched the aisle and noticed Daniel settling back. She felt grateful beyond words. She knew the flight could have ended very differently without him. Time passed and the plane moved closer to its destination. Maya eventually leaned against her mother and closed her eyes. Her breathing became slow and even. Nina held her and finally allowed herself to rest. Daniel looked forward and thought about the moment that had changed the flight. He believed that silence could sometimes be harmful. He believed stepping forward mattered. The sky outside slowly shifted colors as the plane moved onward. The cabin lights adjusted slightly. People stretched and checked the time. Life continued even after the shock. The lead flight attendant passed by Daniel and quietly thanked him again. She said his calm had helped everyone. Daniel nodded and said teamwork mattered. As the plane prepared for landing, an announcement came through the speakers. The captain thanked everyone for their patience and cooperation. The tone was steady and reassuring. Nina listened and held Maya a little tighter. She knew the hardest part was over. She felt relief and exhaustion mixed together. Daniel stood one last time to check on them before landing. He asked if they needed anything. Nina smiled and said they were okay now. Maya opened her eyes and waved at him. Daniel waved back and returned to his seat. He buckled in and looked forward. He felt quiet pride but no need for attention. The plane descended gently toward the ground. The city lights appeared below like scattered stars. The cabin felt calm again. When the wheels touched the runway, a sense of closure passed through the cabin. Applause did not break out, but a shared breath was released. Everyone had arrived safely. But the memory of what happened would stay with them. And the choice to stand up would echo far beyond this flight. The plane rolled toward the gate and the cabin lights brightened as if nothing had happened. People unbuckled and reached for bags, but the mood was not normal. Many passengers moved slowly, still thinking about what they saw. Nina stayed seated with Maya for a moment longer, because she did not want to push her daughter into another stressful crowd. Maya held her toy tightly and looked down at her own shoes, as if trying to shrink into a quiet corner. Daniel stood in the aisle but kept a respectful distance. He did not want to overwhelm them with attention, yet he also did not want them to feel alone. He glanced toward the front where crew members were speaking with airport staff who had boarded. The crew looked serious and focused, the way people look when they are protecting rules that keep everyone safe. Daniel understood that the next steps mattered as much as the moment on the flight. When the door opened, a few staff members stepped inside and spoke softly with the lead flight attendant. The lead attendant pointed toward the area where the trouble started, and the staff nodded. The words were not loud, but their purpose was clear. Nina watched with cautious eyes, her body still protecting Maya, even though the plane was no longer moving. Maya leaned into her mother and listened to the new voices, trying to decide if the danger was truly gone. A gentle woman from the staff approached Nina and introduced herself as Lena. Lena spoke with calm respect and asked Nina if she felt well enough to walk, and if Maya needed water or a quiet place. Nina nodded, though her face showed exhaustion. Lena offered to let them exit first or last, whichever felt safer. Nina chose to wait a little, because she wanted the aisle to clear. While they waited, an older passenger across the aisle quietly apologized to Nina for not doing more in the moment. Nina did not blame him, because she understood how shock can freeze people. Still, she did not pretend the moment was small. She simply said she was grateful her daughter was okay and she wanted to go home. The passenger nodded with wet eyes and sat back down, looking ashamed but also relieved that Nina spoke kindly. Daniel watched these small moments and felt the cabin changing from silence to something else. It was not happiness, but it was human. People were processing what happened in real time. Some passengers whispered about it, and a few checked their phones, because modern life turns every event into a screen story. A woman named April held her phone near her chest, unsure if she should post anything. She looked toward Nina, then lowered the phone, making a quiet choice to respect their privacy. When most passengers had left, Lena returned and guided Nina and Maya toward the front. The aisle was clear now, and the space felt less threatening. Nina stood up slowly and adjusted Maya's small jacket. Maya kept her eyes low, but when she stepped forward she took one brave breath, like a child walking into a classroom on the first day. Daniel walked a few steps behind them, not as a hero on display, but as a steady shadow of safety. At the front of the plane, the lead flight attendant asked Nina if she would like to share a brief statement about what she experienced. Nina's hands trembled, but she nodded. She did not want revenge, and she did not want drama. She wanted accountability and safety, so that another child would never face the same thing. She spoke quietly and clearly, focusing on what mattered, and Lena listened without interrupting. Maya stood close to Nina and held her mother's hand. She looked at the uniforms and the badges and the serious faces. To her, adults often seemed huge and powerful. But today she learned something confusing, because one adult had scared her, and another adult had protected her. She turned her head and looked back toward Daniel, as if her mind was searching for the correct story to believe. Daniel gave Maya a small nod and a gentle smile. It was not a big smile. It was the kind of smile that says, "You are safe, and you did nothing wrong." Maya stared for a second, then nodded back, as if she accepted that message. Nina saw that exchange and felt her throat tighten, because it reminded her that children remember feelings more than details. When they stepped into the airport, the lights were brighter and the air smelled like coffee and floor cleaner. People rushed past pulling suitcases, unaware of what had happened above the clouds. Nina felt strange walking among them, because the world looked normal while her insides were still shaken. Lena led them to a quieter corner near an office area. It was not fancy, but it was calm. In that space, Nina finally let herself sit down. Maya sat beside her and looked around the room. Lena offered water and a small snack, and Nina accepted for Maya. Maya took a sip, and the simple act of drinking helped her return to the present. Nina watched her daughter's hands and noticed they were still a little unsteady. Nina took a slow breath and reminded herself that recovery happens in steps. A staff supervisor named Mark came in and asked Daniel a few questions. Mark wanted to know what Daniel saw and how he responded. Daniel answered in short, clear sentences. He did not exaggerate or act dramatic. He explained that he used calm direction, kept space, and supported the crew. Mark thanked him and asked if Daniel had military training. Daniel paused, then simply said he had served and he was trained to stay calm under pressure. Mark nodded as if that explained everything. Nina overheard part of the conversation and realized Daniel was not just a kind stranger, but someone shaped by hard experiences. She looked at him differently, with deeper respect. She also felt a protective instinct, because she did not want the internet to chase him for attention, or twist the story for clicks. She knew how quickly stories can become messy online. A few minutes later, Nina stood and walked toward Daniel. She did not know what to say at first, because gratitude can feel too small compared to fear. She then told him her name, told him Maya's name, and told him she would never forget the way he stepped in without making things worse. Daniel listened quietly and told her he was glad they were safe. He told her Maya deserved kindness everywhere, not only in safe rooms. Nina nodded and felt tears in her eyes again. Maya looked up at Daniel and asked a simple question that only a child would ask. She asked if he was scared. Daniel knelt slightly so he was closer to her eye level, and he answered honestly. He said he felt worried for her, but he chose calm because calm helps people make good choices. Maya thought about that and then said she wanted to be calm too. Nina squeezed her hand, feeling both proud and heartbroken. In the background, a couple of passengers from the flight walked by and recognized Nina. One of them asked if she wanted them to share her side of the story online. Nina shook her head and said she wanted privacy for Maya. The passenger respected that and walked away. Daniel noticed and felt relief, because privacy is a kind of protection too. Lena returned and explained the next steps in a clear, gentle way. She told Nina that support was available, and that the airline would document everything properly. Nina listened and asked questions, because she wanted to be sure the situation would be taken seriously. Lena answered without rushing and kept her tone respectful. Nina felt a small sense of control returning to her body. As they prepared to leave, Daniel stayed nearby until Nina and Maya were ready. Nina gathered their bags and adjusted Maya's backpack. Maya looked tired now, the way children look after big emotions. Nina thanked Lena and Mark, then turned again to Daniel. She asked if she could at least know his first name, so she could tell Maya later that someone real helped them. Daniel hesitated, then said his name. He said Daniel, and nothing more. Nina nodded and repeated it softly, like it mattered. Maya repeated it too, as if practicing a new word that means safety. They walked out into the airport crowd, moving toward baggage claim and then toward the exit. The world was noisy and busy, but Nina felt stronger with each step. Daniel watched them go and made sure they disappeared into the flow of people safely. He then picked up his own bag and headed the other direction, blending back into normal life. But the story did not end inside the airport. Because somewhere in that crowd, a person who witnessed everything was already thinking about what to do next. And the next choice would decide whether this moment became just a painful memory or a turning point that created real change. Nina and Maya reached baggage claim and found a quieter spot near a wall where fewer people passed by. The bright lights and rolling suitcases made Maya look smaller, but Nina kept her posture steady and calm. She knew Maya was watching her face for clues about how to feel. Nina reminded herself that children borrow strength from the adults they trust. Maya leaned against Nina and yawned, then blinked as if her eyes wanted to close. Nina brushed Maya's hair back and whispered that they were safe and that they would go home soon. Maya nodded but asked why that man was so mean. Nina paused because she did not want to pour heavy words into a child's mind. She chose simple truth. She told Maya that some people carry anger inside them, but that anger is not the child's fault. Maya looked down at her toy and then looked up again. She asked if everyone was going to be mean. Nina shook her head gently and said no. She said there are many good people in the world, and sometimes a good person shows up at the exact moment you need them. Maya thought about Daniel and her face softened. She said the good person was calm. Nina nodded and said calm can be strong. Across the room, April, the woman who had lowered her phone earlier, stood near a carousel watching bags slide by. She kept looking toward Nina and Maya with concern. April was not trying to get attention. She was thinking about her own daughter at home and how quickly a normal day can turn into a moment that stays with you. She walked over slowly and stopped at a respectful distance. April introduced herself and asked Nina if she needed anything. Nina thanked her and said they were okay. April did not push. She only offered a warm drink for Nina and a small snack for Maya. Nina accepted the snack because she knew Maya's body needed comfort. Maya took it quietly and gave April a tiny thank you. April then said something that surprised Nina. April said she worked for a community group that helped families after stressful public incidents. April explained they offered free support and guidance, and they helped people handle paperwork and make sure complaints were taken seriously. April said Nina could decide later and there was no pressure. Nina listened carefully because her mind had already started thinking about what comes after the shock. Nina asked how April knew what to do. April admitted she had once been in a situation where she stayed silent and regretted it for years. She said she promised herself she would not stay silent again when a child needed protection. Nina felt her chest tighten, not from fear this time, but from something closer to hope. Nina realized that even people who freeze can learn and grow. Maya watched the adults speak and then asked if they were friends now. Nina smiled a little and said they were helpers. Maya said she liked helpers. April smiled at Maya and said she liked helpers too. Maya then asked if Daniel was a helper. Nina said yes. April nodded and said that man was steady. At that moment, Daniel appeared at the edge of baggage claim with his own bag in his hand. He had not planned to come over again, but he had looked back and decided he wanted to make sure Nina and Maya were truly okay. He walked up slowly and kept his voice low. He asked Nina if they had everything they needed. Nina thanked him and said they were okay, and she introduced April as a kind passenger. April nodded at Daniel and said she respected how he stayed calm. Daniel simply said the crew did a good job and the priority was the child's safety. April then asked Daniel if he understood how powerful calm can be to a kid. Daniel looked at Maya and nodded. He said children remember who protects them. Maya listened closely and held her snack like it was a tiny anchor. Nina then made a choice that mattered. Nina asked Daniel if he would be okay with her writing down his first name and a short note about what he did, not for the internet, but for Maya. Nina wanted to give Maya a memory that was not only fear. She wanted her to remember that kindness can show up in the middle of chaos. Daniel hesitated, then agreed. Nina wrote Daniel on a small card from her wallet and added a sentence in simple words that Maya could read later. Maya watched Nina write and asked what it said. Nina read it aloud. She said it was a reminder that Maya deserved safety and respect everywhere. Maya nodded slowly and repeated the word deserved, as if trying it on like a new sweater. Daniel smiled gently and said Maya was right to believe she deserved that. An airport announcement echoed through the space and bags continued to arrive. Nina saw their suitcase and pulled it off the carousel with one strong motion. That simple task made her feel grounded. Nina looked at Maya and said they were leaving now. Maya took Nina's hand and stood up. April offered to walk with them to the exit. Nina accepted because she still felt uneasy in crowds. Daniel said he would walk in the same direction for a bit because his ride was nearby. They moved together through the airport, 3 adults creating a small circle of safety around a child who had been shaken by something she did not deserve. As they walked, Maya asked Daniel another question. She asked if he always helps people. Daniel answered carefully. He said he helps when he can, and he also believes other people can help too. He said bravery is not only big moves. He said bravery can be speaking up, making space, getting help, and staying calm. Maya looked at him with serious eyes and said she wanted to be brave like that. Daniel nodded and said she already was. They reached the exit where the air felt cooler and the sound of traffic replaced the airport noise. Nina took a deep breath and felt the world open up again. She looked down at Maya and saw her child still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. Nina realized that survival is not only about being safe in the moment. It is also about how you rebuild after. April handed Nina a small card with a phone number and a simple message. The message said you are not alone. Nina thanked her and put it in her pocket. Daniel stayed a few steps back, letting Nina lead. He did not want to become a symbol that took away her own power. He wanted her to feel her strength returning. Nina then turned to Daniel and spoke with clear calm. She told him she did not want this to be a secret that only hurts in silence. She said she would report it the right way and she would protect her child's peace. She said she would not let shame attach itself to Maya. Daniel nodded because he understood that shame often tries to land on the wrong person. He told Nina she was making the right choice. Maya tugged Nina's hand and asked if they could get ice cream later. Nina smiled, surprised by the simple request. She realized this was Maya's way of returning to normal. Nina said yes. Maya smiled a little, the first real smile since the flight. April smiled too, because it proved the child still had light inside her. Daniel gave a small wave and prepared to leave. Nina thanked him again and said she would never forget his calm. Daniel said she did not need to remember him as a hero. He said she should remember that she and Maya kept going. Nina nodded and held Maya closer for a moment. Daniel walked away into the parking area and disappeared into the crowd. He did not look back for attention. He looked back only once to make sure they were safe. Then he kept walking, carrying the quiet weight of doing the right thing and letting it be enough. Nina and Maya stepped toward their ride. Nina opened the car door and helped Maya climb in. Maya buckled herself and held her toy again. Nina sat in the front seat and stared at the windshield for a second. She then started the car and pulled into traffic. As the airport grew smaller behind them, Nina glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Maya looking out the window. Maya was quiet, but she was steady. Nina reached back and touched Maya's hand for a moment. Maya squeezed back. The city lights stretched ahead and the road felt like a promise. Nina knew that healing would take time. She also knew Maya would remember two things from this trip. She would remember that some people can be cruel. And she would remember that calm helpers exist, and that her mother did not give up. And that second memory would be the one Nina worked to make stronger every single day.